Robert Weissman has led Public Citizen since 2009. In addition to his role at Public Citizen, Mr. Weissman works as a staunch public interest advocate and activist, as well as an expert on a wide variety of issues ranging from corporate accountability and government transparency to economic and regulatory policy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks to the committee for your leadership, and thank you for your stamina. America will not solve its greatest problems if we don't rescue our democracy. Those problems, from severe inequality to catastrophic climate change, we're not going to get there if we don't deal with the democratic deficit. Americans agree on a progressive agenda. They want to raise the minimum wage. They want to stop corporate-oriented trade deals. They want to get tougher on Wall Street. They want to break up the big banks. They want to expand Social Security. They want to close corporate tax loopholes and make the rich pay more. They want to make sure Medicare can negotiate drug prices. They want to deal with the pressing environmental problems of the day. They support much tougher enforcement against corporate wrongdoers. But we don't move on those things because of the political power of the corporate class and the exclusion of millions of voters from the political process. I want to talk about that democratic agenda today, focusing not so much on the voting rights agenda, which has to be part of a comprehensive plan, but on the money and politics issues. As my written testimony goes into some detail in explaining, our current campaign finance system empowers the corporate class to determine both who wins elections, who runs for elections, and what kind of policies this country ends up with. Just taking one piece of that and elaborating on what Secretary Reich said earlier, the dominance of the super rich in the political process is insufficiently appreciated. It's not just a few people, it's a very, very tiny number of people. The top 0.01% of the population is responsible for 40% of campaign contributions. If we look at super PACs, the top 100 individuals, 100 people, responsible for 60% of the money that goes to super PACs year over year. And through the first half of 2015, 158 families were responsible for half of the money that went into the presidential election. So we're not talking about Guatemala, we're talking about an oligarchy emerging in the United States of America. Not surprisingly, the American people are furious at this situation and are demanding change. In fact, there's unanimity on this question. In the New York Times poll, analysts report the debate really is over whether the system needs fundamental change or whether it has to be completely rebuilt. That's the only thing that people differ about. The good news is also, however, that by overwhelming margins, Americans aren't just upset, they agree on the need for change and on what those solutions should be. Now, it turns out to be not just politically smart, but politically necessary to deal with both campaign finance and voter suppression issues with a broad democracy agenda. What Stan Greenberg and other pollsters are telling us is Americans now have so much distrust of government and believe the system is so corrupt that unless politicians lead with a reform agenda, they won't listen to the rest of the progressive agenda that might be put forward. So it has to be made front and center in the Democratic Party platform. Now, the substance of that, as David Donnelly mentioned, is consensed around both on the money and politics side through the Fighting Big Money agenda, which is attached to my testimony and is the product of all the leading national reform groups, as well as on the voting rights side with reform of the Voting Rights Amendment, the Voting Empowerment Act, and automatic voter registration. But beyond the substance, I think it's important to think about what characteristics are important of a democracy agenda. First, it has to be comprehensive. Americans are not going to be satisfied with peaceful reform because they get how bad the situation is. Second, a democracy agenda has to elevate big and bold ideas, starting with a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, and also including public financing, small donor empowerment. Third, also, however, the democracy reform platform has to include measures that are winnable and deliverable without congressional action, because Americans have to see that actual progress is possible on these issues. Fourth, in my view, the Democratic Party should consider unilaterally adopting measures to at least govern how it conducts its own primaries. Not unilaterally disarming against Republicans, but in own primaries looking at measures to deal with some of the worst abuses of the post-Citizens United era. And fifth, and crucially, the platform must demonstrate a sense of urgency and evidence specific commitments that telegraph to the American people that we are serious about this issue and serious about taking steps to deal with it. That it is a priority and it's not just talk. That the party must say we're making specific promises to take rapid action in areas in our power to advance the democracy agenda. I list a bunch of things that I think would evidence that, but perhaps most important is a commitment to introduce within the first 100 days of a new administration a democracy legislative package, and to make passage of that package a priority within the first term of the new Democratic president. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you were speaking, I couldn't help but think about some questions that came up yesterday with some of our young people. It's clear that our young people get it, and they're getting it more and more. And if we're not careful, they're going to outdistance a whole lot of people in both parties. And that is so very refreshing to know that they are there and making a difference. But as I listened to you, a number of things that you were talking about, it's the same thing that they were talking about. Mr. McGibbs.
I was intrigued. One of the perennial problems here is, we say the right thing, and then people run for office using the old methods. And that's one of the things that causes the cynicism. Can you expand on the idea for what, at least in the primaries, Democrats might do that would allow them to differentiate and demonstrate what proper campaign conduct might look like? Because that strikes me as one possible way to square that circle.
Yeah, there are a number of possible measures, and I elaborate on them in my written testimony. And one example would be to do the People's Pledge, which was innovated by Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown in their Massachusetts Senate race, where they both committed to refuse outside spending on their behalf. And they said, look, if outside groups come in and spend on our behalf, we'll offset that with charitable contributions from our own campaigns. And it worked. The outside groups more or less stayed out, at least on advertising. It didn't cover grassroots mobilization activity. And as a result, that was an expensive race, but it was a less negative race, and it was a more engaged race, and as it happened, it had a good outcome for us. And that's one example, and I think there are a lot of similar things that might be done, including, for example, at least refusing lobbyist contributions or different industry contributions in the primary election season.
We'll have one more question, and that's with two more, Ms. Tandon and Mr. Gunnels.
Thank you so much. I could not agree more about the priority these set of issues should be. I really want to just ask you a factual question, which is, you talked a lot about you mentioned the 1%'s impact on percentage of elections this cycle, percentage of fundraising this cycle. Do you have a breakdown between Democrats and Republicans on that number, and does it include obviously I assume super PAC donations as well?
I can get back to you with a firm number. I will say it's characteristic of, it's absolutely inclusive of the super PACs. It obviously excludes the dark money organizations where we don't know who the donors are.
Right.
It is characteristic of both parties. The dark money is overwhelmingly being spent on behalf of Republicans, but super PAC spending is roughly equal between Democrats and Republicans, I believe.
Not this cycle, right?
Well, perhaps not this cycle, but this cycle is maybe a bit of an outlier.
Mr. Gunnels.
Yes, Rob, thank you very much for your testimony. Really appreciate it. Very powerful stuff, and I think we have a lot of work in front of us to restore democracy and to reform our broken campaign finance system. I just wanted to talk to you about a report I think you did a few years ago on the amount of lobbying and campaign contributions that Wall Street made from 1998 to 2009. I think they had spent over $5 billion in lobbying and campaign contributions to deregulate Wall Street, which of course led to the 2008 financial crisis, which cost millions of Americans to lose their jobs, their homes, their life savings. How important do you think it is, if we're going to prevent another financial crisis, to regulate Wall Street, and how much do you believe that if we do not reform our campaign finance system, we could have another financial crisis like we had a few years ago?
Yeah, so in the study you're referencing, we looked at the 10 years prior to the crisis, and we found that Wall Street firms, financial sector, had spent $5 billion on campaign contributions and lobbying, and we connected that to a series of deregulatory measures that are widely understood to have been responsible for the crash. Interestingly, that was actually pretty small compared to what's going on now. So that preceded Citizens United. In the post-Citizens United era, the industry is spending about $1.5 billion a year on lobbying and campaign spending, more or less. So we're looking at least double the amount that we saw in the 10 years prior. And there's no way to understand this issue or climate change or any other issue if you don't look at the money. The reason American people in this area, as in many others, consensus around, appreciate Dodd-Frank, want to do more. And we're not moving forward for reasons that are well understood in Washington and well understood outside of Washington, which is there's too much influence from Wall Street. I should say also, as a final thing on this issue, because it's supremely important for the big picture, there is a very bad synergy between concentration of wealth and concentration of political power, and it centers on Wall Street. The extreme wealth on Wall Street gets translated into political power for Wall Street that is spent to ensure that Wall Street will have perpetual and intensifying and increasing control over more and more share of the national income and wealth.
Thank you very much. Thank you.